We finally reached the end of the 2025 Formula One season, and after crowning a champion in Abu Dhabi, I thought I'd rank each driver's performance throughout the season. The driver's standings don't always tell you the full story on who the best really was. Of course, the top drivers are always at the top, but what about some of the midfield drivers who raced unbelievably well but just didn't have the machinery beneath them? I'm going to be ranking each of the 21 drivers on who I thought was the best, all the way down to who I felt didn't quite reach the heights they'd have hoped for. Let's talk. Now, like I said in the intro, I will be ranking all 21 drivers who raced this year, so even though Jack Doohan did only race 6 times, I will include his stint. I feel like this year's been really difficult to try and rank each one of the drivers because it really feels like from about 6th to honestly about 17th that you can really chop and change where you place a lot of the drivers. And that's not me saying that I think the 17th best driver could also be the 6th best driver. That's more so me saying that around that like 10 to 14, 15 range, I find it really hard to try and differentiate who I'm ranking there. But besides all the rambling, this is how we're going to be doing it. So I've created this grid, which is a complete replica, obviously not one for one, but it emulates the actual starting grid that the F1 drivers themselves use, and we're going to rank them in this order. So top obviously being P1 all the way down to P21. And that's exactly where we're going to start. So down in P21, the first driver we're ranking is Jack Doohan. Now, if I'm being completely honest, as unfair as it feels, I feel like this is almost a shoo-in for anyone's rankings to have him down in P21. I think we can all agree that it wasn't exactly fair that he only got the first 6 races of the year, but I think we can all equally agree that he didn't quite show enough in those 6 races. I definitely don't think he was as far away from Pierre as people try and make it out to be, but he definitely had like his moments here and there, like when he didn't close the DRS going into turn 1 at Japan. I don't exactly think he helped himself with moments like that, but I really think he should have been given more of a fair opportunity, if anything. It also definitely didn't help him when he had the looming idea of him being replaced by Franco Colapinto just hanging over his head from even before the season started. But either way, whether it's fair or not, he is my 21st ranked driver for this season. Now moving swiftly on to our next driver, in P20 I have Yuki Tsunoda. Now of course we all know the news now that he won't be on the grid next year, but I don't feel like that's as much his fault as it is Red Bull themselves. I know that may sound hypocritical when I've got him down in 20th, but I'll explain that. Yuki in the first 2 rounds when he was in that V-carb looked unbelievable, to be honest. He'd made Q3 in both the first 2 rounds and made SQ3 as well in China. And we can sit here all day and play a game of what ifs for what would have happened if he had have stayed in that car, but the reality is he didn't, and his performances just weren't good enough. Of course we know it's not his fault entirely, and it's purely down to the car itself because he's not the first and he may not be the last to fall victim to that second seat at Red Bull. But in saying that, being so far off the back of Max, who finished 2 points off the title, it's just not good enough for him to be able to keep his seat in that team. I think far too many times this year he was knocked out in Q1 or Q2 and just didn't get enough of a performance. And it definitely wasn't fair on him to have to step into that car 2 races into the season because he's got no time to prepare and no time to get used to that car apart from just being right in the thick of it in the middle of a season. I think Yuki as a talent deserves to be on the grid. I don't think he should be off the grid whatsoever. I think he's proved in his previous years that he is good enough to be a Formula One driver. I just don't think the situation was right for him. But regardless of that, he is my P20 driver for this season. Moving on to my P19 driver, it's someone I mentioned briefly before, Franco Colapinto. Now, of course, he is the one who replaced Jack early in the season, and he's definitely had a better go at the car than Jack did, but I don't think he's lit the world on fire with his performances, especially with the expectation we had considering how he did at Williams last year. As the season's gone on, he's definitely gotten a lot closer to Pierre than when he first stepped into that car, and he showed a lot more promise than I think people will give him credit for. But he's definitely fallen victim to the fact that Alpine's performance has just fallen off a cliff as the season's gone on. I do feel like 2026 is a real make or break year for his career though. For those reasons, that is why he is my P19 driver. Now, moving on to P18, I've got Lance Stroll. If I'm being honest, there's not really much more we can say about him year on year at this point. I feel like he was alright at the start of the season. He had his moments here and there throughout the rest of the season, but for the majority of it, he was just classic Stroll. Qualifying has still been a massive issue for him this year, so hopefully next year that turns around, because on a race day he's not been incredibly poor, it's just qualifying that's holding him back. It's a weird case with him because I don't know how much longer he'll stay in the sport for, because he doesn't really seem motivated, but he also has a lifetime contract if he wants it. It'll be interesting to see next year if they have a good performing car again, will he be as motivated? Because if you look at 2023, he started off the year really strong, even with 2 broken wrists, he was still finishing P6, P5, P4. So maybe if he has a car that can perform at the heights like that, maybe he will be a bit more motivated, but I suppose only time will tell. So with Stroll slotting in at P18, let's move on to P17, where I have Esteban Ocon. Esteban's a bit of a tough case because he started off the season stronger than his teammate, but then as it went on, he just started to tail off a little bit more, just didn't look as comfortable in that car. I'm not sure if it speaks more to Ollie's performance compared to Esteban or if it speaks to Esteban's underperformance, but he just didn't look to be as on the pace as Ollie was for the season. He lost the head-to-head battle in qualifying against Ollie, which of course rookies sometimes do come in and just have that natural raw pace. So you can definitely give him the benefit for that, but he also wasn't a million miles behind Ollie either. I just feel like for the expectation he had to come in as the team leader at the start of the season, to get beaten by his rookie teammate just isn't as good of a look. So that's why Ocon is my P17 driver for this year. I'm going to try and go a little bit quicker now just so we don't have a 4-hour video. So in P16 I've got Liam Lawson. Liam was the other victim of the Red Bull second seat, and it took him a little while to get back into the groove when he did get down to VCARB, and he definitely had his moments during the season, and the back half of the season has been pretty consistent, but I don't think you can forget about what happened in those first 2 races. In hindsight, him being dropped after 2 races was a good thing for his career, but it definitely wasn't a good look, and it still did happen this season. I think he's shown a lot more of that potential that we all saw in him in the second half of the season, especially since that summer break, but I just don't think he had an incredible first half of the season. Apart from his P6 in Austria, I don't really remember much that really stood out from his season apart from the fact that he did get dropped. So that's why I've got him slotted into P16. This is where it starts to get really tricky for me, because in P15 I've got Gabriel Bortoleto. I feel like any of the next maybe 5 drivers here, I could really put them in any order, so I wouldn't blame anyone for saying that this is too low for Gabby. Gabby definitely didn't have a terrible season. He had a quite decent season, especially for a rookie year, and I think he fell victim at the start of the year to the fact that the car was so poor. He was pretty decent in qualifying, but he just didn't have the race pace to back up the qualifyings he had at times, which is just a general trait of rookies year on year anyways, so I'm not saying that he's a terrible driver, I just think that was one of his fallbacks this year. I've definitely seen enough from him in terms of potential to know that he has it in him to be one of the top drivers in the sport, and I really hope that Audi do provide him a car next year where he can show that potential off even more. I just think his inconsistency on Sundays has been the thing that's held him back this year. And I wouldn't have him too far from his teammate either, which is exactly why I've got Nico Hulkenberg in 14th. Now, let me get the obvious moment out of the way. I think we were all over the moon when he got his first podium this year. I think it was almost like a relief for the entirety of the Formula 1 world when he got that podium. But I feel like there was just something about his qualifying that just wasn't there this year. Nico has a reputation of being one of the fastest drivers over 1 lap on the grid, and it took him until Brazil to even make Q3 once, which just feels off for him. But then in the races, he would always manage to find a way, whether he started P20 or P17, he'd always find a way to get into the points from those positions. The perfect example being when he started P19 in Silverstone and ended up on the podium. He just had a knack for finding his way into the points from a Q1 exit. I think for obvious reasons this is probably going to be the most memorable year for Nico, but I don't think it's his best representation of the driver he is this year. So that's why I have him personally in P14. Now in P13 I have another one of the rookies where I have Ollie Bearman. Now of course Ollie came into the season with a little bit more of an expectation of being able to adapt quicker to the F1 life, considering he had the 3 outings last year, but it just felt like it still took him a little bit of time just to fully bed into the Haas team. He had a good race in China where he made a lot of good overtakes and he looked a lot more confident and comfortable in the car compared to the week before, but apart from that, there wasn't really much more to write home about for the first half of the season. However, after the summer break, it just felt like something changed overnight. Him and Esteban were always close in qualifying, but it felt like he just always seemed to have the edge after that summer break. He went from being down in P19 with only a handful of points and quite a way off the back of the rest of the midfield drivers to ended up finishing in P13 with 41 thanks to his second half of the season. He just showed that he had that little bit of something else to him in that second half of the season, and I think he really showed that he does have potential to drive at the highest levels. And if he keeps performing like he did in the second half of the season, if this Hamilton era doesn't work out, well, maybe Ollie is the next one up, considering he's still part of the Ferrari Academy to some extent. Overall, I just think if he had have been able to drive like this in the first half of the season, which no one was expecting him to, because after all he is a rookie, I think he could have ended up way higher on this list, but for now I've got him down in P13. Now this next one I'm going to move through pretty quickly because we all know his quality. In P12, I've got Pierre Gasly. I think Pierre's shown enough throughout his career so far that we all know that his position in the driver's standings isn't a real representation of his driving ability. He himself had a good year in terms of getting the most out of the car that he physically could. It just happened to be that the most out of the car was probably still a Q1 exit most weekends. I'm hoping for his sake next year's car will be significantly better, because for someone with his talent, he shouldn't be sitting there lingering around that 19th, 20th sort of range. He's more than good enough to fight towards the front, maybe not in a top team as of right now, but he's definitely good enough to fight towards that top of the midfield like he did in 2021 with AlphaTauri. I think he had a good year, it's just he was hampered by Alpine being Alpine, so I've got him in P12. Now, for the next driver, could be kind of controversial, I don't know, but in P11, I have Lewis Hamilton. Now, I think in terms of what we expect from Lewis Hamilton, the name, of course, this season has been horrific by those standards. I think people seem to forget that he is arguably the greatest driver of all time just because this season hasn't really gone to plan. There's no denying that Lewis has struggled a lot this year, and I think it's been made to look a lot worse considering Charles hasn't struggled as much as Lewis has. And he definitely hasn't helped his case by finishing off the season with 3 Q1 exits in a row in a Ferrari. He definitely had his highs, like that sprint win in China was definitely a big moment and it really felt like his welcome to Ferrari moment. But it's just felt like his season has just slowly been on a decline since that moment, where he's had a few P4s, he's had a few P5s, but he's had a lot more finishes towards the outside of the points, or maybe just inside the points, than he probably would have liked to. It's also made to look just a lot worse in general when you look at the fact that Charles got 7 podiums and Lewis didn't manage to score 1 for the first time in his entire career. But it does just start to make you question, does he have it in him to still get to those heights of 2017 and 2018 and 2020, or is he just over that wrong side of the hill now? I really do hope that's not the case, because I don't want to see his career just fade out this way, especially with all the hype that's surrounded the fact that he's now at Ferrari. But at the end of the day, there is just no denying that this season has just been, by his standards, terrible. Which is exactly why I can't put him any higher than P11. Now, before we get into the top 10, I wanted to just change it up a little bit, and I wanted to bring up what I thought was the race of the year, and what I also thought the moment of the year was. Now, for me, you can call me a bit biased, but I personally thought the race of the year for me was the Australian Grand Prix. When you take everything into account, where it was the first race of the season, the weather, the drama that started before the race with Isack Hadjar crashing on the formation lap, we had cars qualifying out of position like Yuki in P5. We just had so much going on in that race. It just felt like I was sat on the edge of my seat the entire time I was there. And then just when you think enough has happened in the race, the massive cloud of rain comes over on lap 44 and changes everything. I just feel like from start to finish, it was probably the best race of the year because it just constantly kept changing. Now, for the moment of the year, I feel like this is just unanimous around the Formula 1 fan base in general. For me, the moment of the year is Nico Hulkenberg getting a podium. It was one of the few rare moments where the entirety of the F1 fan base come together to celebrate one moment. And I think it really felt like 15 years worth of waiting did just lift all at once. So that's why it's my moment of the year. But now that that's done, let's get into the top 10. And we're going to start off by talking about Fernando Alonso. I feel like Fernando is another one of the drivers that his points total doesn't really do him very much justice. Although it took him all the way until Spain to score his first points, a lot of that was down to the fact that he had poor reliability. He was in the points in Monaco before his engine gave out on him, he was in the points in China when his brakes gave out on him, and then his own fault, he crashed out in Australia whilst also in the points. I feel like a better representation of looking at how his performance was this year is to look at his qualifying outings. He consistently outqualified Stroll and was very, very much on the limit of that car the entire season. It felt like more often than not he was either right on the cusp of Q3 or making it into Q3 basically every single week. And it was in the most Fernando fashion possible that the only time he was in the top 10 in the driver's standings was after the final race of the season. I just think without the reliability that hampered him at the start of the season, he could have finished as high up as 8th in the driver's standings, which is exactly why I think he was the 10th best driver this year. Now in P9, I've got one of the 2 rookies I haven't mentioned yet, Kimi Antonelli. I feel like Kimi had a lot more pressure on him than a lot of the rookies did this year, if not all of them, considering he was replacing Lewis Hamilton and going straight into a top team. He started the season off okay, he had the really good race in Australia, although the qualifying wasn't as good, his race day was really good. And he didn't feel like he was too massively far behind George to start the season, but it was during that European spell where, barring Canada, from Imola onwards he just really seemed to struggle in that car. For that 8 or 9 race stint, he just didn't look the same driver as he did in the first 5 or 6 races of the season. And it also didn't help his case that he had to sit there and listen to rumours about Max Verstappen potentially replacing him at Mercedes. But to give him the credit he deserves, from Monza onwards he was a lot better than he was in that previous stint. He picked up 2 more podiums and finished inside the top 5 3 more times on top of that. And he really started to give everyone tangible evidence that the potential was real and he did have those performances in him. I think when you take everything into account, from circumstances to rumours to his age, I think it was a very impressive rookie season, and I think it was highlighted by those peaks of Brazil and Vegas. But I then think it was equally balanced out by that poor stint from Imola all the way through to Zandvoort. I can 100% see the potential in him, and I really hope that next year he can be that little bit closer to George and maybe even challenge him a little bit, kind of similar to what Oscar has done with Lando year on year. So for this season, I have him in P9. So now moving on to P8, I have the final rookie I haven't spoken about, Isack Hadjar. For me, I think Isack Hadjar has been the rookie of the year, not by a country mile, but has definitely been, in my opinion, the best rookie. I think if you take everything into account, from how late he was signed to VCARB at the end of last year to what happened in Australia on the formation lap, I almost think he had every reason to not do well this season. And yet here we are, where after the season he's had, he's been promoted to Red Bull, or in every other second driver's case, demoted to Red Bull. He's been unbelievable in qualifying all season, and it really felt like he just hit the ground running from the very first session of the year. What impressed me the most was how well he was able to bounce back from that moment in Australia, where in your first race of your career, to have something like that happen, it can absolutely crush you and ruin you. But that seemed to not really have any lasting effect on him whatsoever. And I can't fail to mention the fact that he also finished on the podium in Zandvoort in his rookie year in a midfield car. So for me, he's been the best rookie this year, and that's exactly why I have him in P8. Now, moving on to P7, this is actually one that I ummed and ahed about a little bit. I've got Carlos Sainz. Now, I tried really hard to not let recency bias affect this one too much, but it's definitely something you have to take into account because of how well he's been doing in recent weeks. Now, in terms of scoring points, the season didn't quite go to plan to start with, at least what he or anyone else would have imagined for him. But if you dig a little bit deeper, you'll find that his qualifying was a lot better than what his results were showing, where he had 3 P6 qualies in a row, and it just felt a bit more like bad luck, bad timing, or just unreliability were holding him back a bit. An example that comes to mind is in Bahrain, where he qualified P6 but then ended up having to retire because Yuki hit the side of his car and completely damaged his side pod. I think with races like that, where you've got Alex also scoring points on top of that, I think it just makes it look a hell of a lot worse in terms of a points total than it really was. I think to start the season, he was definitely behind Alex, but then in the second half of the season, I think he was the better of the two drivers across the board in general. He had the upper hand in qualifying from Baku onwards and also outscored Alex significantly in that time. And of course, we all know he had those two podiums in another midfield car, which is something that he and no one in Williams expected before the season started. He's a driver that I feel, once again, his points total doesn't do him justice for just how good he was this season. And of course, next season is a complete fresh start for every driver and every team, but with the way he finished this season, I wouldn't be surprised if he took that confidence into next year and maybe did beat Alex this time. But for now, I have Carlos in P7, just behind his teammate who I have in P6. Now, for me, even though his second half of the season statistically has been way worse than the first half, I think Alex Albon has been the best midfield driver this year. When you think back to the start of the season, or even when Carlos signed, there was a lot of pressure being put on Alex to prove that he had it in him to beat a competent teammate. It felt like this year was a real make or break year for Alex and a real test for how good of a driver he has become, and in my personal opinion, he passed it with flying colours. His first half of the season was one of the most consistent across the grid, where he scored 3 top 5s in a Williams, which was unexpected to say the least. If we take out his reliability issues in Spain, Canada and Austria, he only failed to not score in 2 of the first 14 races. And it wasn't like he was just scoring small points either. He finished inside the top 5 4 times and inside the top 7 another 2 times on top of that. To me, it seemed as if he took the weight of the expectation and the pressure and used it as fuel to drive at the highest level he had ever driven at Williams. But from Baku onwards, which coincidentally is when Carlos's form had an upturn, it just seemed like something changed in Alex's performances. He consistently was getting knocked out in Q1 and was quite far off Carlos in a lot of the qualifying sessions post Baku. And it just seemed like he just lacked the confidence he had in the car that he had in the first 15 races of the season. But even though his performances did seem to fall off a cliff towards the end of the season, I think he did way more than enough to earn the title as the best of the midfield, which is exactly why I have him in P6. Now, this is where we start to move into the top 5 now, and I'm starting it off with the other Ferrari driver, Charles Leclerc. Now, this is where I start to honestly just feel bad for Charles, because Ferrari took a car that was fighting for a Constructors and was one result away from winning the Constructors last year, to giving him a car that finishes P4. Charles is probably still the fastest driver over 1 lap on the grid, and he proved last year when you give him a race-winning car, he's more than capable of converting on race days too. So to watch him this year get the absolute most out of a car that was just terrible, you almost just can't help but feel bad for him. But nevertheless, he managed to still get 7 podiums in that car, and he was always getting the most out of it week in, week out. Whether or not the most of it was very good is up for debate, but he was still getting the most out of it. His pole in Hungary was a good example of him ragging everything out of that car and managing to get the reward for it. Ferrari more than ever need to give him a title winning car, because at some point he's going to get fed up with them being Ferrari. And I hope now, with the fresh start in the regulations, Ferrari are able to actually provide him with a car that can challenge for a title, because he well and truly deserves it, and he's proved it again this year. But in my opinion, there is 4 other drivers that have been just a bit better than him this year, which is why he's in P5. Now, the next 2 drivers, for me, it all came down to the final race for where I place these 2, because in P4 I have Oscar Piastri. For the first 15 races of the year, Oscar was the most consistent driver by a country mile. Up until that point, he'd failed to qualify or finish outside the top 4 for the entirety of the season. And I'll be the first to admit, I thought he was a shoo-in for the title after Zandvoort. But whatever happened from Baku until Brazil absolutely derailed his entire season. Whether it be the pressure got to him or something about the car wasn't working, maybe his driving style didn't suit those tracks as much as it did Lando, it just seemed like we were looking at a different driver than the first 15 races of the season. He ended the season positively in terms of his driving in Qatar and Abu Dhabi. Of course, Qatar didn't end up being a positive weekend for him, but like everyone else, I just can't help but wonder what happened between that 6-race period. I think in terms of pure race pace, I think he was always that little bit behind Lando still in terms of just pure outward pace, but he clearly made a big jump in terms of qualifying pace in comparison to Lando this year compared to his first 2 years. I've personally got no doubt that he'll get a championship at some point, whether that be next year or further down the line, but I just can't help but feel like this was an opportunity wasted in the end. Taking into account the fact that it is his 3rd season, he is an unbelievable talent. He's going to be in the sport for many, many years and have many more opportunities. And I'm excited to see what level of growth he's going to show next year, considering how much growth he's shown year on year so far in his career. So for me, this year, he has been the 4th best driver. Now, moving on to 3rd, like I said, it was almost a coin toss between who I put 3rd and 4th, but I've gone Lando Norris. Now, if I'm being completely honest, the thing that has put him above Oscar in my rankings is the fact that he got the championship over the line. At the start of the season, there was no hiding from the fact that he was the bookies' favourite for the title. And it honestly looked like it was slightly getting to him with how he was performing in qualifying. There was multiple weekends where when it came down to Q3, when it was that crucial final lap, he would just have a mistake that would ruin his lap or end up with him down in P10, P9. And it felt like he was almost throwing away points to his teammate at that stage of the season. But from Austria onwards, he took his performances to a whole new level that we have never seen from him before. He also had to then overcome a 34-point deficit to his teammate after the devastating DNF in Zandvoort. And yet, after all that, he managed to come out on top as the champion. For the last third of the season, he had a massive advantage over Oscar, and he made that count by constantly scoring crucial points over him in every single weekend. It really did seem as if the same pressures that would previously make him crumble were fueling him to drive at a higher level than he'd ever had in his life. And ultimately, that's what won him the championship, because he was able to hold off a charging Max Verstappen who came back from 104 points down and managed to get every result he needed. But even though he did win the championship, that doesn't mean he is the best driver of the season in my opinion, which is exactly why I have him P3. Now, if you've been keeping track, you'll obviously know who I've got left as the 2 drivers, and to me, these 2 have been the most consistent and just the highest performing drivers this season. So without further ado, the driver that I have as P2 for this season is George Russell. Now, for me, I actually think George has probably been the most consistent driver for the entire season. I genuinely believe that George has been driving at a championship winning level for the entire season, and maybe even last season too. Unfortunately for him, he just hasn't had the car beneath him to challenge right at the front week in, week out. But with that being said, he still managed to get 9 podiums and 2 wins, maximising almost every result that he could physically get out of that car. He only failed to score points once all season, which was in Monaco, where his engine gave out on him in Q2, and if you know anything about Monaco, you know it's impossible to overtake around there. I truly believe that if Mercedes can give him a car next year that can challenge for a title, he will absolutely maximise it. He's proven time and time again that he has championship material about him, and I really hope he does get the chance to prove that at some point. But it was just not enough to snatch P1 in my rankings this year, so he is P2, and of course, P1 is Max Verstappen. Honestly, at this point, what more can we really say about Max? He somehow managed to get himself back into the title fight after being 104 points down after Zandvoort. And to somehow only manage to lose it by 2 points after all that is genuinely mind-boggling. There's just almost this sense of inevitability when it comes to Max, where you just know for a fact that he's always going to be up there. He's always going to be challenging for the win, always going to be challenging for a podium, pole, whatever it is, he's there. And because of how good he is, he also exaggerates the gap so much between him and whoever his teammate is at the time. Because no matter what car you give him, he just seems to find that 1%, even less than 1% perfection out of it. I really don't think people appreciate just how good Max Verstappen really is and how lucky we are to be able to watch arguably the greatest racing driver ever, full stop. And I can completely understand that he does have his drawbacks. He has his outbursts, like in Spain, which could potentially have cost him the title. You never know what could have happened after that, but you can't deny how good he is behind the wheel. I think because he's not dominating the sport anymore, he's getting more recognition for just how good he really is. But I hope that continues, because if he's given a car that can potentially dominate, you know for a fact he will. He's proven for the last 5 seasons that he is still by far the best driver on the grid. Even if he's not given a car that's going to challenge next year, I still wouldn't be shocked if he found a way to challenge in a midfield car. So that is exactly why he is my P1 and my best driver of the 2025 Formula 1 season. Of course, I'd love to hear all your opinions down below. Who's been your driver of the year? What's been your race of the year? What's been your moment of the year? Do you agree or disagree with anything I've said? And just anything else I may have missed. Make sure you guys drop a like and subscribe. I've been Wheel Talk. We've had a real talk. I'll see you guys in the next video.